Hello, this is Friday, October the 25th, the year 2019. I got a tape here titled Jack McLamb, Psychological Warfare on America. And let's hit the play button. Pat Shannon.
All right, just going to do a nice, easy, mellow song. People aren't awake yet. There's so much bad stuff that's going on in this world, but you know those bad boys are going to have to pay. And that's what this song is all about. When it's all over, when it's all done, at what cost the battle, what prize has been won? When dark clouds surrender, when the storm is undone, will you stand there shining in the light of his sun? Are your motives worthy? Are your motives true? Are you doing things you would have done to you? Are you really proud of the things that you do? Will you stand there beaming when your life's finally through? When the dawn is just breaking at the end of the night, will you still have freedom? Will you still have rights? Were you proudly hailing through the perilous fight? Did you hide in darkness or try to shed light? As the curtain is closing and your life passes by, will you pleasantly smile, or will you break down and cry? Will you honestly say you gave life your best try? If there's a reason for living, did you ever ask why? When the dawn is just breaking at the end of the night, will you still have freedom? Will you still have rights? Were you proudly hailing through the perilous fight? Did you hide in darkness or try to shed light? As you walked through life, did you seek to grow? Did you hold on tightly, or did you let it all go? Did you seek the truth, or did you not want to know? In the final assessment, you will reap what you sow. In the final assessment, you will reap what you sow. In the final assessment, you will reap what you sow. Thank you. Yeah, payback's going to be real tough for some folks. You can't take it with you, and as far as I'm concerned, one thing you do take with you is your guilt. And if you're guilt-free, well then God bless you. But if you're not, I think you all know where you're going. Anyway, my name is Dave Von Kleist. Dave, quote, Riddell, unquote, Von Kleist. Riddell is a stage name. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because when I was using that name, I put an album together of this kind of music, and I have a few more copies of the CD down at the booth, and I invite you to come down, get a copy of it, take it home and make copies and share it with all your friends. Maybe they'll get the message. Now, in the meantime, I don't know where Jack is. Jack should be here. One more? Okay. Okay. All right. Some of you have heard some of this music, some of you haven't. And a lot of the music that I play for the benefit of folks that are not paying attention. We're trying to get them to pay attention. You folks are here and you've got a question mark over your head. You're looking for answers. But unfortunately, most of America is running around with an exclamation point over their head because they know all the answers. Well, those are the ones who are at risk, and those are the ones that should be here learning. And it is for this reason that I write these songs in the hopes that someone will listen.
Shed many a tear, and when they sit down to cry, they never question or try to find an answer. That's the way it's been for oh so long, and you're so used to it you don't see what's wrong. It's in your history, and if you just look you'll see that it's repeating. When lawyers' litigation goes without examination, you can bet that it won't take very long. With rules and regulations and without representation, pretty soon you'll sing a slavery song. No, go ahead and do your own merry way. But I can tell you that you'll soon curse the day you were asleep at the wheel, you didn't know it was real. You'll learn the hard way. How can you get someone to hear when their ears are filled with self-imposed fear? If there's a voice in the crowd that shouts a message out loud, will someone listen? And how can you get someone to see when they can't bring themselves to turn on TV? If someone turns on a light, will others join in the fight or turn a blind eye? When your country's education doesn't teach about your nation, how your family fought so hard to be free, it creates a situation and promotes perpetuation of a people who will live on their knees. No, go ahead and go your own merry way. But I can tell you that you'll soon rue the day you were asleep at the wheel, you didn't know it was real. You'll learn the hard way. Doesn't teach about your nation, how your family fought so hard to be free. It creates a situation and promotes perpetuation of a people who will live on their knees. No, go ahead and go your own merry way. But I can tell you that you'll soon curse the day you were asleep at the wheel, you didn't know it was real. You'll learn the hard way. Will someone listen? Or turn a blind eye. No. Thank you. No, I don't sing to my audience. I sing at them. And I hope you don't mind. That's okay, because I'm not going to apologize anyway. Sometimes to get the mule's attention, you got to smack him between the eyes. I know I'm not talking about you folks being mules. That song is directed once again to the folks that aren't listening. Trying to get them all to figure out what's going on here, and you're not going to do it unless you get their attention. And if it's going to be through music, well then, I hope it is. I don't know. But information is the key. Education is the key. And one gentleman who has been spreading information and education for the law enforcement officers across this country to let them know what their true oath is all about and where their efforts should be directed is Officer Jack McLamb. He's a hero in my eyes, ladies and gentlemen. Give him a round of applause as we bring him to the stage. Jack McLamb.
Good to see everybody. Are you having a good morning? Good. Let's see. We're just into the afternoon, I guess, now. I'm still on Idaho time, so it's, let's see, in Idaho it's 10:45 right now. Well, this morning I'm going to dedicate my speech to a very brave police officer. He's now dead because he found out too much. And I think it's appropriate that I dedicate my speech today to Sergeant Terry Yakey of the Oklahoma City Police Department, who was suicided because he knew too much about the Oklahoma City bombing. Terry was a very special fella. He was always winning awards. He was a great big man. He looked like a linebacker. He's a black man, and he was just had a smile that when he smiled, the whole world smiled with him. And he served on the Oklahoma City Police Department quite a number of years. But he was one of the first officers to enter the Oklahoma City building after the bombing. And he called his wife shortly after that and said, "They're lying. It's all a lie." And he was in tears on the phone with his wife. Quite a story. I won't get into it this morning in depth, but I wish that you'd get a hold of Pat Shannon. He's here at the Media Bypass booth, and he's written the best articles on Sergeant Terry Yakey, and I wish you'd pass those around so that we can really give tribute to a real honorable and true and godly man that served his nation and died because he wanted to serve God and you folks and live under truth. And he was violently killed. His arms were slashed 11 times, both of his arms, and his jugular vein on both sides was slashed. And then in an attempt to escape, he climbed a couple walls and out in the country and climbed a couple miles, a lot of times on his knees and just crawling. And then he ended up with a gunshot wound to the head, and that was his suicide. So it's quite a story. And Pat Shannon over at Media Bypass booth, I wish I knew the number of the booth. I would tell you. Maybe Pat's listening. He'll come in and let us know. But get a copy of Media Bypass and read about Terry Yakey. There's a lot of good police officers out there and soldiers that love God and love their country and love you. And they're very angry today about some of the things happening in this nation. And so Terry's wife is being pursued now. The government thinks that she knows too much, and she's being followed and harassed and getting death threats on the phone, and she's moved 5 times, and she's still being harassed to keep her quiet. Praise God she's not dead at this time, but I hope you'd hold her and her family in your prayers, because sometimes you can find out things that really, truly put your family in jeopardy. So thank you for that. Today I'll be talking about psychological warfare on the American people. Out of chaos comes order, a new world order. And this is a continuation of my talk yesterday. How many of you were here yesterday and was able to hear me speak in the first part of this program? If you were not, and a lot of you were not, please go outside the booth here. Oh, here's Pat right here. Pat, stand up a minute. Let's thank him for his great article on Terry Yakey. Yeah, he's one of our best writers in the country here for the freedom movement, and he loves God, loves liberty, and he's a very brave man, and his life has been placed in jeopardy a number of times, and I know they don't appreciate him writing about Sergeant Terry Yakey. But, brother, I just told him to go to Media Bypass booth, and what booth number is that? On the left? Okay. All right. Well, recognize this guy's big smile and go down and get a copy of that and make copies of it and get it out, because these brothers that die for you and me to try to expose this tyranny in our country need to be held up as our heroes of today, because indeed they are. Thank you for that, brother. Really appreciate it. you should talk to him about his trials and tribulations in his life, too. There's a very brave American that's one of our heroes. Yeah. Pat Shannon. Yeah. So I'll start today. Like I say, if you missed yesterday, it's very important that you go outside the booth here and get the tape from yesterday's audio tape, because some of you will be a little bit put off by some of the things I say because you didn't hear yesterday. And I'll do the best I can, but it's a little difficult sometime in a two-part program like this. But I'll start off by something I used yesterday. J. Edgar Hoover was a much maligned man. He wasn't all the things you've been told that he was. I have a number of friends of mine, the L.A. chief of the FBI, Ted Gunderson, for one, who knew Hoover very well. And he wasn't the horrible beast of a man that you've been told he was. And he said this, and I used his quote yesterday, and I'll start off today with it. He said, "The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous that he cannot believe it even exists." And I think that's where we need to start, because I'm going to talk about some things today that you people that were not here yesterday or maybe have no idea of what we're going to be talking about will be startled, and you'll be shocked by some of the things we're talking about. Because these things, 20 years ago, I would have told you before I started my work to educate our police and soldiers that this can't happen in America. It cannot happen. You're crazy. If you'd have told me these things that we're learning today that our government at the highest levels are involved in, you couldn't have convinced me that these things would happen, because I was in the war during the Vietnam War, and I believed in my country. I believed in our system. And when I became a police officer, I believed in our country and I believed in our system. And it just can't happen. This can happen in East Germany, or it can happen in South Africa, or it can happen in Russia or other places where communists have taken over and they've killed 170, almost 200 million people for their beliefs, for believing in God and so forth. But it couldn't happen in America. So J. Edgar Hoover said it right, and I'll probably use this a little later, because I'll have to remind you again that the reason you're so upset by what's going on, you're going to have a hard time believing it, is because it's so monstrous that it is hard to believe. The best topic to work on today is, first of all, yesterday I left off Waco. Remember, yesterday I said I'd catch up on Waco because I missed that yesterday in talking about the capital crimes, meaning murders and very, very serious crimes committed by our government against the American people. Well, we dealt with some of those other capital crimes in pretty good depth yesterday, but I didn't have time to go over Waco. So let me take a minute on that and tell you that just briefly, because I know you're going to be hearing a lot more. Pat Shannon is writing a lot about Waco right now, and he's written a lot about it in Media Bypass, and ask him about that too, and he'll get you copies of that. So if you're not too familiar with what was happening there, he's covered that very well. But if we're interested today in justice, we do know now as a fact that because of the evidence that has come out, if you've watched the movie Waco Rules of Engagement, the documentary, you saw the FLIR radar, the government radar tapes, video of taken very high over that church buildings, and you were able to see that when the fire started and it proceeded back towards the back of the buildings, towards the auditorium, the people, of course, were moving back and keeping away from the fire. And there was people back. The only thing wasn't burned is the auditorium, and they were filling up in the auditorium and trying to run out. Well, in that film, you'll see machine gun nests outside firing into the building as the people tried to get out. That's why 16 or 17 bodies were found there filled with bullets in the back of the church auditorium. And so when I saw that, you know, knowing that this is my fellow soldiers and my fellow police officers there doing these things, I felt the same as when I was up at Ruby Ridge with the Weaver family and saw Vicki Weaver's body laying under the table as Colonel Bowe and I were trying to get in that siege and holocaust really against that family by federal agents. And I felt the same way when I saw the FLIR radar and the machine gun 3 posts opening up on the people trying to flee out of the back of the church buildings there. And so if you haven't seen that film, Pat probably knows where to get that too. Go by his booth, he'll tell you how to get a copy of the Rules of Engagement. You can get it on video now, and you need to get that around, show it to your family and relatives, because something has to wake the people up today. We have to believe and truly understand that these things really are happening in America. If we don't know that, we continue to listen to ABC, NBC, CBS, and all the rest, and we continue to be fooled and continue to be asleep in this nation. And so I hope that you'll get a copy of that and share it with your relatives and loved ones. But also we have a problem with the Texas Rangers today being very troubled about securing a massive amount of evidence from the Waco Holocaust there when they destroyed these people. They don't want to hold on to that material any longer, so they're thinking that they will hand it over to Judge Walter Smith. Now, Judge Walter Smith is the government agent judge that prosecuted and persecuted the living remaining members of the Branch Davidians. And when he was so angry and so mad when the jury came back, even after he manipulated the evidence, manipulated the witnesses during that whole trial to be sure all the evidence didn't go to the jury and that certain witnesses were not heard by the jury. Walter Smith did everything he could to be sure all these guys were found guilty of murder of these federal agents. It didn't happen. The jury saw through it, and they called them not guilty, every single one of them, of homicide. But there were a few that were, a number of them that were found guilty of manslaughter, which of course wasn't true either, but that's the way they voted in the jury. And so Walter Smith, the judge, was so mad and so evil that he gave those people 30 and 40 years in prison for that charge. Never in the history of mankind has manslaughter ever drawn that kind of time for such a charge. And so if Walter Smith gets all the evidence turned over to him to safeguard by the Texas Rangers, it's gone. You know, he'll do the same thing that he's dedicated his life to, and that's dishonesty and cover-ups and protecting the system from the people, his whole career. And so we have to pray about that, and I would make calls to the Texas Rangers, and I would tell them, don't do it. He's shown his colors. You know what's going to happen to that evidence if you turn it over to that judge. Send, email, phone calls, faxes, whatever you can, and ask them, please, you're an honorable agency. They have helped in exposing some things, the Texas Rangers, but they should not turn over all the evidence to Judge Walter Smith. And the next thing is, don't believe in this ex-senator that Butch Reno has now put in position of doing this independent investigation, because not only has she been a part of the selection process like she did with Ken Starr, and Ken Starr was her boy, and I don't know what you've been told, but Ken Starr was their guy, and he made sure that Monica Lewinsky was on the lips of all the American people for a year, and the Red Chinese treason and everything else went under the carpet. His job was to be sure that none of that got on the Clintons, and he did a masterful job. Of course, he's supposed to be our hero because he did such a great job at exposing Monica Lewinsky and his escapades. Well, Butch Reno now has Senator Danforth. And you know, when the major media, the socialist Marxist media in America, says he's the most wonderful guy and she couldn't have picked a better guy, that we're in deep trouble with Danforth. Because any decent person they would hate and they would ostracize in the press. So we really need to be in prayer that the congressional investigation will be successful. Now, there's a lot of Republican, Democratic, socialists up there and globalists that have tried to cover up this whole thing too in the Congress and in the Senate. But our only hope is not Danforth and it's not Judge Walter Smith, but it's that the Congress and the Senate will be so pressured by us, the American people, that they'll be afraid to do a cover-up. So you need to do some phone calling, you need to do some noise making with your congressmen and senators to be sure this time they don't cover it up, but that the truth comes out about these executions there in Waco in this very important church attack on a church here in America. Okay, enough on Waco. I want to talk about now the political. Waco was the end of my talk on the criminal activity. Now there's a lot more. I mean, I'm reading a newspaper right here that lists all the executions by the federal government of American citizens all the way back to Kennedy and Martin Luther King and others, and of course they were executions, and they were for political reasons. You know, the civil rights cause really didn't get the final push until a little 25-cent bullet went into the brain of Martin Luther King. And then, boy, the civil rights movement really began to move. And so the communists have always been willing to, take out millions of people, much less one individual, to produce a program or some progress in the socialization of America or anywhere on earth. And so you can read, and I know that once again, Pat Shannon's news magazine, Media Bypass, has material on all of those things. One of the best publications that will list different subjects about who really, the evidence for the killing of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King and so forth. So that material is available. But we will end the talk now on the criminal cases, and we'll go into the political cases like John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King and so forth. But because I have a very limited amount of time today, I'm going to start with the World Trade Center bombing. In the military, I knew for years, because I worked with these guys that were a part of our military that would commit acts of, well, it was war during the time when I was in the military. And so for our guys, special teams, to go into country and execute leaders with one bullet to change the politics of a country, or to blow up a building and blame it on a faction in another country, to topple certain factions, political factions, to install communists, because we never went into a single country and did this unless a communist was installed by our government. And you look at it, everywhere we went, we toppled dictatorships, which were kind of right-wing dictatorships. The guys were evil guys most of the time, but we always installed communism. So we've never gone in and killed a dictator or blown up a building in another country that it wasn't for political reasons. And during the war, this is what we were doing. I didn't disagree with that because I didn't know about the whole game that was being played psychologically on the American people. But now we have a situation where these men and women in these units are now being used on the American people for political reasons. And we have something called legislation by bullets and bombs. It's a term the military use, legislation by bullets and bombs. You use bullets and bombs to pass legislation, to change whole governmental systems, the politics of a nation. And so we now have in America, years before, like I said, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and others who have died for political reasons in this country, been executed. But today we look at a piece of legislation that would not pass. It's draconian, it's despotic legislation called the terrorism bill. Remember the terrorism bill they couldn't pass? They couldn't pass it because it was absolutely unconstitutional. It took away many of our rights and freedoms. And so the congressmen and senate wouldn't even pass it because they thought we'd give them such heat. So terrorism had to happen in America in order to get that legislation passed. So we have the World Trade Center bombing, that we had an informant, an FBI informant inside this terrorist group that was going to blow up the World Trade Center. And we knew down to the very minute that the building was going to be blown up, and the very intelligent informant, some of these informants they put inside these organizations aren't very intelligent, but this one was. And what he was doing when he would talk to his handler every day at the FBI, he would record it. And boy, if they'd have known that, they wouldn't have used him, because you're not supposed to do that. When you're talking to your FBI handler and you're a deep cover informant in these organizations, they don't want you taping them because they want to change the stories sometimes when things go wrong. Well, in this case, he was recording everything, and the very night when he talked to her on the phone, he recorded and said, listen, tomorrow night, this bomb's going to blow up. And she says, don't worry, we're going to go in. The FBI handler said, we're going to change the powder so it won't blow up. Don't worry, we got it under control. Well, as you know, the bomb blew up. And so we know that that was a government operation, not because they were the terrorists that went in and blew it up, but they knew to the moment it was going to happen, and they wanted it. So why would they want it? Because they want to change the politics or pass legislation in a nation that they could not get to accept it without the terrorism. So then along comes Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City bombing. Once again, Pat Shannon has covered the whole thing, and he's working on it now to expose it. He told me of some plans I won't tell you about right now that they've got to even expose more of it being a government operation when that building blew up. And we know that today through many reasons. Here we've got Sergeant Terry Yakey that's dead. Well, that's just a very small part. When I talked to Hoppy Heidelberg, and he was on my radio show here a couple years ago after that happened, he was the grand juror that was booted off the grand jury because he kept asking very important questions. And the government didn't want him asking those questions, and so they booted him off. He was the grand jury foreman. And so, but he told me, I said, when he was on my radio show, I said, one thing, Hoppy, that we will see if that's a government cover-up is that, like in the John F. Kennedy case, all the witnesses begin to die off. You know, all the witnesses are dead today, and you couldn't retry the thing because they've killed them all. All the witnesses are gone. I said, so the witnesses will start dying that had anything to do or saw too much or heard too much in the Oklahoma City bombing. He said, well, as of today, 11 of them are now dead through suicide, accidents, and so forth. So he was the first one that made my mouth fall open when he told me that. And so I don't know. That was several years ago, and I don't know how many now. And, of course, Sergeant Terry Yakey was one of those people. But anyway, he told me many other things that because he was helping with the investigation and still is working to try to expose the truth along with Pat Shannon and others. But the thing that helped our police association the most was when General Ben Parton, who some of you have heard here, and I hope if he's speaking today you'll hear him again, but he is the one that has done the most investigation into the bomb and explosive technology that's allegedly brought down that building. And he states emphatically, and I have his report, and you can get his report too, some of you probably already have it, his diagram of exactly his scientific evaluation of how the Muir building was brought down from inside. It had nothing to do with a fertilizer bomb. If there was even a fertilizer bomb, there was no residue of a fertilizer bomb, which should have been everywhere. So we're pretty sure there wasn't even an anthro bomb outside that building. But he does show exactly which columns were wrapped with high explosives inside the building and how the building was brought down. So I'm going to leave that now because I think we've established that we have a serious problem with nothing we can say that makes any more sense than the most criminal minds in America have found their way to the very top of the government of the United States. The most evil criminal minds are now, and I won't just say the top of the government of the United States, because we have governors, every single one of our governors throughout America are globalists. They are pushing for a Marxist world government plan under the UN, every single governor. And so governors and presidents and others want to surround themselves at the very top with people just like themselves. City mayors, town mayors and so forth want to do the same thing if that's their politics. Socialist, Marxism, world governmentism, you know. They will surround themselves with these same type of people that will commit the same kind of crimes that they commit at the very top because the goal is the same. They've got to have Marxist world government where there's only a super rich and a super poor and no middle class. That's the plan. That's the way it's going to be. And you're going to be peaceful or they're going to make you peaceful. You know, world communism says peace to a communist is oppositions to communism. That's peace. You know, And if you're opposed to communism, they're going to make you peaceful, because it'll be a peaceful system. If you want peace, the Bible says when they say peace, peace, sudden destruction will befall them. And that's the point we're at today. The leading experts in our nation in mind control, and one of them, I really enjoy this man because he is one of the best in the nation in mind control, is Stephen Jacobson. Stephen Jacobson put out some tapes on mind control in America, and without a doubt, he knows what he's speaking about in the way the American people is being brainwashed to accept this wonderful utopian system that's being established to save us all from the chaos that is coming upon our land and is planned to come upon our land. Stephen Jacobson said, the problems in America are the result of people being led to believe things that are not true. And you think about it. Truly, our problems in America are, for the most part, because we don't know what is going on. And of course, that's what brainwashing is all about. It's supposed to stop you from knowing certain things and giving you certain information to lead you in a certain direction. And so Stephen Jacobson, if you contact my office, we can put you in contact with him and you can get some very good material on mind control in America. So I encourage you to do that, because this kind of information needs, once again, to get out to families and friends for validation. In other words, you're not just saying it, but the experts in America are saying how it is happening, and then they begin to realize that maybe you're not as crazy as they thought you were. You know, your relatives especially. I know, because for years we've all gone through that. Your relatives said, hey, when we go to Thanksgiving dinner, don't ask Uncle Jack about politics. Don't get him started. Okay, just don't even ask him, because you scare them, don't you? And they don't want to hear it. They're all going to be raptured out of here anyway, so they don't even want to think about it. They don't even have to worry about it, right? Why fight? We're on the next flight, right? Yeah, okay. This is a very important document you ought to get. You ought to have this because it is called The Satanic Conspiracy to Rule the World. It's a poster. And this officer, too, and I've dedicated some of my work over the years to Officer David Gamir, Dave Gamir, because Officer David Gamir is now dead because of what he knew and what he tried to share with the American people. Officer Dave Gamir was a undercover agent for the feds for many, many decades. He infiltrated the Symbionese Liberation Army, the Black Panther Party, and others. And what David Gamir found out, he had a photographic memory, and he was a genius. And he was a danger to the conspirators, because everybody he met, everything he heard, he remembered. And he could write it down months later. And so one night, we sat in his place, and he drew this on a piece of paper. Way back to the 11th century, he drew circles and squares and plugged organization and people into those squares, showing the center of this chart shows the controlling organizations way back to the 11th century up to today that control the right and the left of the political spectrum. Can you imagine that? Way back to the 11th century this has been going on? We think it's new today that the Republican and Democrats are the same and their leaders are identical, and they are. But it's been going on a long time. And the people, the groups in the middle have been controlling this for decades and decades, centuries and centuries. And so Dave Gamir drew this on a 8.5 by 14 piece of paper, showing me how the right and the left has been controlled all these generations by the people in the middle and groups in the middle. And some years later he died. He was killed because the government warned him not to tell the American people this material and pass it out. And of course, Dave just did just the opposite. He got on a speaking circuit and began to share this information with the American people. So the government kept their promise, and he's now dead. So it's the only thing we have left of a very brave American named David Gamir, a soldier for God and country in law enforcement. So come by my booth, would you, and get a copy of this and pass on the legacy of David Gamir, because he is truly an American hero, too, that will probably never go down in our history books, because, you know, these people that serve the country and die, many times they're pretty much unheard of. But I'm trying to keep his name and legacy alive a little bit. come by the booth, and you'll see this hanging on our wall there, and you can get a copy of it. Our booth is on that side of the wall, all down to where you see the blue balloons. See blue balloons in the air? That's where our booth is right there. It's called Police Against the New World Order. So this will cause a lot of conversation among your family and friends and so forth. And you want questions. They'll say, "What is this?" And when you start telling them, they'll just be awestruck because they can see that the right and the left have always been controlled by the people in the middle. So it's a very valuable document for you. I have always so much material, and I never get to use it all, but I pick out the best here because we always are running out of time, it seems like. Also, I have in my booth, which is something you'll see and find very interesting, the reason the system is so evil, and I do a talk on why this program is so evil, this world government system is so evil, and why our government leaders commit capital crimes against their own people and so forth. Well, this chart, I do a talk on that, shows that the top level, now read what I'm saying, listen to what I'm saying, the top level of the globalist movement are Luciferians. They believe in Lucifer. Now, it doesn't matter if you do or not. I do, because I'm a Christian and I know what's in the Bible. But if you don't believe in Lucifer, it doesn't matter. They do. And they serve him, this god that they call Lucifer, the god of the earth. And this chart that you'll see on our wall there at my booth is another very important way for people that you know to visualize the truth. Because this chart was made, this poster, very pretty poster, was made by Luciferians, the Council of Europe, the one setting up the European Common Market. And they have exposed themselves here as worshipers of Lucifer. And if you notice the audacity of them to use a Bible story, them rebuilding the Tower of Babel, and their logo's on it, by the way, the Council of Europe, but they're rebuilding the Tower of Babel with block-headed people. There's block-headed, all the people are block-headed, even the babies down there are robots, and that's you and me. It means we're too dumb and too brainwashed to know what we're helping them set up a world government antichrist system right now today. And so this poster, when they found out we were using it in America, they used to send them to us free, but when they found out we were using it to expose their plan to Americans, they stopped sending them to us, the Council of Europe. They're very angry with us, but somebody snuck down and got them reproduced. So we got a lot of them in America today. Well, I hope you'll get them and pass them out too, because there's no denying. You see, they're building up the Tower of Babel today to the Gotamendes, the Baphomet, the sign of Lucifer, the inverted star, the goat's head. And so this is not the God of the Bible that the Bible people were building up to God of the heavens. This is God Lucifer. And so it's a very revealing poster, and I hope you'll get that too. These are the things we like you to have because they prove things that you can't prove by telling people. They got to see things like this because they give credibility to the things you try to share with your family members and friends and so forth. One of the most intelligent men in the world that I've ever met was a dear brother by the name of Dr. Stuart Crane. And you know, he was in jail so much here in America for his work to try to expose this kind of tyranny to American people. I've lost track of him now, but he's from this part of the country. And Dr. Stuart Crane said it so well. He knew of the conspiracy, and he knew that anarchy and crime would be used one day to subjugate the American people and get them to give up their rights. And here's what he said. He said, anarchy and crime is always used when a small minority wants to come into power over the majority. The results of a successful anarchy is always a police state. You know, when you cause so much fear, you get the American people to beg for martial law. And so he said,
all right, it appears we're at the end of the first side of the tape. I'm going to flip it over.
No wonder he's not alive anymore.
Very smart man.
Is this before the Patriot Act?
I don't know what year this was, Aaron. I don't even know if it has a second side.
And he said, why? If the type of government is dictated by violence and crime in the streets, an autocratic, ruthless dictatorship is inevitable because the people will demand it. And that's exactly what's happening today. We think that things just happen because they happen. It's the accidental theory of government. It's not true, folks. There's never been an accidental theory of government. Wasn't it FDR that said that if it happened in government, it was planned that way? That was his statement. If it happens in government, it was planned that way. That was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he was a part of it, so he should definitely know. George Bush talked about how they would bring chaos to our land, and it would bring on the New World Order. He made a lot of statements about the New World Order, but here's one of his statements. Out of troubled times will come, a New World Order will emerge. That's President George Bush, June 19, 1988, when he said that. Well, I see I'm running out of time, and Joyce Riley needs to get up here soon, so I've got to hurry right along. And you need to stay and listen to her because she's really got some important things to tell you. The drugs being brought into the United States by our own government has been one of the most successful programs, if not the most successful program of getting you to give up your rights that has ever occurred. And I know some of you are just shocked by what I just said, but we have 10,000 police officers and soldiers right now that are on our mailing list that know that the government is bringing drugs into the United States and distributing it mostly into the black and Latino communities. And I do a speech on this, and I hope you'll contact my office and get a copy of my speech of how the black and Latino children were chosen years ago to be the receivers of these drugs. They could have chose the white children, but they didn't. I don't know why. I think, as Margaret Mead and others have stated in their writings, it's because the globalists hate people of color. Although they've used them over the years, the communists have, to promote their programs in the United States. They've duped them. They've duped them into believing that they were going to get some benefit or something, and that the socialists and Marxists in our society love them so much that they're trying to help them. But those very same socialists and Marxists are the ones bringing the drugs in and feeding it into the veins of little black and Latino children to cause crime that the white majority will cry, every black is a doper, every black's a criminal, every Latino is in gangs. And not only would it separate the people, the good people of America, the black and Latino and white people, separate them to where they will not come together to fight a common enemy, which is definitely what these Marxists and socialists wanted to happen. Because if we ever got together, the blacks, Latinos, and whites and Orientals ever got together, all of us Americans, we could conquer our common enemy. And they don't want that to happen. So the brilliance of this plan to bring drugs in constantly, tons and tons every year, and Colonel Bo Greitz, we wrote a story about his proof. He found that out. He went to Burma and talked to General Kumsaw, the head of the Golden Triangle, and he proved it to him. He showed him the list of names of Americans, top officials that bought drugs from him over the years to bring it into the United States. It's been the most successful program, but it has destroyed whole generations of our brothers and sisters of color in this nation. We need to expose that. I'm asking you to call my office or get a copy of my newsletter off the booth and order those tapes where I talk about the destruction of the black and Latino communities on purpose by the government, and start exposing it so that we can help our brothers and sisters, Americans of color, save their children. If they know the truth will set you free, and we need to bring it to them. Yeah. I've got to talk about solutions here, but I've got so much important material here for you, but I'm going to have to talk about solutions. The shootings, I was going to do a whole bit on the shootings today. Very important, but I'm just out of time. And so I want to tell you get on my mailing list for Aid and Abet Police Military Newsletter. I'm going to be writing about the shootings. These have all been planned. And I can't tell you, it would take me an hour to explain psychologically how these children have been under, and adults have been under the care of psychologists and psychiatrists and been given drugs and everything, and how you build these type of individuals to go in and do these shootings and then kill themselves, so the police officers have nobody to interview and to interrogate. But there's much evidence, folks, and I don't have time to present it here today. Little Martin, this guy, Martin Bryant in Tasmania, that's allegedly went in and killed 29-some people and caused the Australian people to lose all their weapons. They didn't lose all their weapons because most of them hid them, praise God. But they got a sufficient amount of their weapons because of allegedly little Martin Bryant going down and killing all these people in Tasmania. I get 2 Australian newspapers, and they now know, of course this is the Patriot newspapers, they now have the evidence to prove he wasn't even there. He didn't do it. Another government operation. The Columbine shooting, we now have 20 of the students that are being threatened because they've come forward and said there was a third shooter. And the government, of course, is saying, no, there wasn't. And so that's in another publication. There's investigations going on by our side all the time. And so we don't have time to get into that. But just don't believe the things you're being told. We have to have chaos. We have to have terrorism. We have to have gun violence in order for you to acquiesce to give up your freedoms so that you can be subjugated under this world government system. And it's working. The sad thing is it's really working for the majority of the people. Let's talk about answers for a minute before I have to sit down. If I had time, I would tell you at length. We've done a 5-year study, our police and military organization, on where's the safest way to ride out what is coming in America. 19 years ago when we started this work, our police and soldiers believed there was still time to stop what was happening and win back our government and get it back under the people. But because the people of America that have the morals, the moral code to do that won't help, and I'm talking about my own Christian brothers and sisters, because they've all been neutralized with inerrant doctrine being taught by the Christian ministers throughout the land. One is Romans 13, that you and I as Christians are supposed to obey everything evil government tells us to do, because even evil governments from God is not true, but it has caused Christians to be neutralized. They will not stand up. They will not speak out. Christians would come out of the churches today. We could still take back America, but folks, it's not going to happen. The preachers have been mistrained. Bella Dodd and another guy, Bella Dodd and Carl Prussian testified in the 1930s before the House on Un-American Activities that they were told to infiltrate the seminaries of America and mistrain the new ministers so that Christians would be neutralized. That's when they injected the rapture doctrine. The rapture doctrine, why fight, we're on the next flight, that caused Christians to hide in the pews, and the preachers say, shut the door and pray that the Antichrist doesn't get to us before the rapture. You know that doctrine? And so we've lost this war because Christians have been neutralized with doctrines. The rapture doctrine started in 1835. It wasn't heard of before that. And so we're not going to get help from the majority of Christians, and we're not going to stop this thing from coming. We're being punished as a nation, just like every other nation, for kicking God out. And so what are we going to do if we know it's going to come? We're going to have to do what God told us to do. The Scripture says we have to prepare arks in the time of Noah, because he promises some of his people will survive, those that have awakened and come back to him under 2 Chronicles 7:14. But I would spend an hour telling you about why you can't stay in the population centers. It's a death sentence if you and your family stay in the population centers, because they don't like you if you're a Christian. Now, if you're some other religion that'll go along with the world religion that's being set up by the Baptists and the Lutherans and the Catholics and the Jewish people, and everybody is setting up this world religion under the ecumenical movement. Everybody softens attendance, everybody get along, everybody be tolerant. That's the world religion. If you'll do that, you can even be a Christian and live with the mark of the beast, you see. Because to be a Christian in that, you will have, all the people will have to accept the mark. But so you can't live in the cities and survive. You can't live in the suburbs by yourself or with your family or with 10 or 20 other families and survive what's coming. I'm out of time, but I must tell you this. We spent 5 years using the best military minds we could get to work out a program of how, going by Scripture, God told us to survive the days ahead. He talks about survival is in these arks that have been prepared like in the time of Noah. Where are these arks? How can we find them for our children and our grandchildren? I've got a duty. I'm a father of 3 and I have 7 grandkids. I need to find one of these arks. What's God talking about? Well, first of all, he said get to the mountains during these days because he's going to destroy this land that has tossed him out. And so our only salvation truly, folks, is to get into the Word of God and pray for God to give you guidance and direction. And like those of us that have been investigating for 5 years, find that ark in the time of Noah. It's probably not going to be in your location because we took 2 years putting 2 maps on the wall, and we crossed off everything on the maps we didn't want or couldn't have, like natural disasters, nuclear targets, nuclear reactors, and all the bad things on one map using military strategy and everything, and then on the other map, everything we needed to survive during the very best of days and the very worst of days. Best groundwater, best season, not too cold, not too hot, longest growing season so we could set up a barter system among our families and share food with each other. Kissinger says he's going to control the people with food because people without food will turn in their guns for food. And he's absolutely right. And so we started Christian constitutional communities in Idaho County, Idaho. Turned out throughout the whole United States, the only county that had exactly what we needed and none of the things we didn't need was Idaho County, Idaho. It had a small population, so with 500 families, next year we will be taking over the whole political apparatus of that county. We'll be removing the bad judges, the prosecutors, sheriff, county supervisor, school board, tax people, eliminating property taxes so you can own your land again. And all of those things that should be done in America if it's going to be a godly nation. We can't take America, but we can provide, as God said, an ark in the time of Noah. Colonel Bowe helped do this research for 5 years, and we now have 9 communities, just opened number 10 and 11. Thousands of people are coming. We have 325 Christian families from 30 different states, and every one of them comes in and says, I don't know why I'm here, but God just led us up here. So we're finding now that there are places we can go to provide a place, just like God said he would go, said he'd go provide a place for us. We, grandparents and parents, have to provide a place for our children and grandchildren, even though they think you're crazy. You listen to me now. I know what you're going through when you try to tell your children and your relatives about what's happening. That makes no difference. You know you're right. You have a duty, and we have a saying in our group, duty is ours, consequences are God's. We just have to do our duty. And as a grandfather, I have a duty, even though my children hope I'm wrong. My 3 boys say, oh, Dad, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to know about it. I'm up in Idaho County, Idaho, and I'm building a place for my 3 children and 7 grandkids because they're not aware of what's happening now. But if I don't do it, who's going to do it? I'm obligated. Duty is ours. Consequences are God's. I'm going to do my duty, and if they can get out in time and get up there, at least they've got a place to come to. If I don't do it, they have no hope. They have nowhere to go to get out of the population centers in the suburbs. If you're by yourself in the woods, the hordes of people escaping the city when the doors are closed on the city that are non-Christians will take your life and take everything you've got because they're going to be hungry, they're going to be scared, and they're not Christian, and they don't believe in love thy neighbor like thyself. These are the neighbors, when you go to the supermarket, they come in and rob you. Those are the ones coming your way if you're out in the boonies by yourself. The military strategy is you have to have hundreds and hundreds of people that believe in love thy neighbor like thyself, believe in God. And that's what we're providing. Hope you'll come by the booth and pick up one of our flyers that shows Doves of the Valley, Idaho County, Idaho, and take it with you and pray over it. That's the first thing. God may not want you to be with us. You need to know that. He may have something else for you. But I want you to know it doesn't matter what your color is. It doesn't matter anything about you, only that you love the Lord Jesus Christ and you love our constitutional system. that was based on biblical principles to come and live with us and live in one of those arks that God is providing. Next year, you'll be one of us that vote to remove all the political offices and put godly people in every office, the first time in 100 years in America in any county that's ever been done. So I hope you'll pray for us, and we will pray indeed for you and your families. And so I want to thank you for coming today. Let's get Joyce Riley in here soon. I hope you'll listen to her. And God bless you. And I'm honored to serve with you at this time in America's history. Our Police and Military Association stands ready to help you in any way we can. We love you, and God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you.
God bless. May he rest in peace. Jack McLamb.